My sister ran off with $310,000. Then 30 years later, her son arrived at my home with nothing. I never thought of myself as special. I was just someone who believed in working hard and living within my limits. From a young age, I learned that money did not come easily, and if you wasted it, no one would come to save you. I watched my parents struggle through long years, counting bills at the kitchen table, deciding which ones could wait and which could not. That stayed with me. Even when life became easier, I never forgot those lessons. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. I started working early. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I liked the feeling of earning my own money. It gave me control, a sense of safety. While others spent their pay as soon as it arrived, I saved. I skipped things I wanted, telling myself I could have them later. Over time, those small choices added up. I built a quiet, steady life. Nothing flashy. No luxury cars or big houses. Just stability. I was proud of that stability, even if I never talked about it. To me, money was not about showing off. It was about sleeping well at night, knowing one bad month would not destroy everything. I kept records, planned carefully, and avoided risks. People sometimes teased me for being too careful, but I did not mind. Careful had worked for me. My sister was different in almost every way. She was bright, charming, and full of ideas. Wherever she went, people noticed her. She had a way of making even simple stories sound exciting. When she talked about her plans, it felt like anything was possible. She was always starting something new, always chasing the next big opportunity. Growing up, she was the one everyone expected great things from. Teachers loved her. Friends admired her. Even strangers seemed drawn to her energy. I admired her too, in my own quiet way. She had courage I did not have. She was not afraid to take chances, to leap before looking. But with that courage came chaos. Projects started and abandoned. Jobs taken and left. Promises made with confidence, then forgotten when something more exciting appeared. She never meant harm. She just believed that somehow things would always work out. Over the years, I became the steady one, the reliable one. If something needed fixing, I handled it. If there was a problem, I found a solution. When she stumbled, I helped her stand again. That became our pattern, so natural that I never questioned it. When she came to me that year, she sounded unusually serious. She said she needed help, not advice, just help. There was money involved, she explained, and she did not trust herself to manage it properly. She said she trusted me. Those words mattered to me more than the numbers she mentioned. Trust, especially from family, carries weight. She explained that the money came from a mix of things. Part of it was from something left to her, part from a business idea that needed structure, and part from plans she had with someone else. The details were messy, but the request was simple. She asked if I could hold the money for a while. Not forever. Just until things were settled. She said she wanted to protect it from bad decisions. She said I was the only one she knew who would not be tempted to touch it. She laughed when she said that, but there was something almost pleading behind the joke. I hesitated, but only briefly. This was my sister. We had shared a childhood, shared losses, shared memories that no one else could understand. If I could help her avoid a mistake, why wouldn't I? I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was safe. I told myself family looks out for family. We talked about rules, at least loosely. The money would stay untouched. If she needed any of it, we would talk first. Everything would be clear. She thanked me again and again, her voice full of relief. She said she finally felt calm. At first, everything seemed fine. The money sat where it was supposed to sit. Life went on. We talked often, just like always. She sounded hopeful, energized, already planning what would come next once things were in order. Then small things began to change. She stopped answering calls right away. Not always, but often enough for me to notice. When I asked, she said she had been busy. Meetings, travel, opportunities. Her life was always busy, so I accepted that explanation. Sometimes she would call late at night, talking fast, jumping from one idea to another. She would mention plans that sounded bigger and riskier than before. When I asked how those plans fit with keeping things stable, she brushed it off. She said I worried too much. Once, I asked if she wanted part of the money back for something specific. She paused before answering, then said no, not yet. The pause stayed with me longer than her words did. Another time, she asked me questions that felt strange. She wanted to know exactly how quickly money could be moved if needed. She framed it as curiosity, but it made me uneasy. I told myself I was overthinking. I did not want to be the suspicious sibling. I did not want to damage our relationship by acting like a guard instead of a brother. Trust, once questioned, never feels the same again. I chose trust. I reminded myself of all the times she had helped me in her own way. When I doubted myself, she had believed in me. When I felt invisible, she had pulled me into the light. This was my chance to return that loyalty. Still, there were moments when a quiet voice inside me whispered that something was wrong. Emails went unanswered. Plans changed without warning. She spoke less about the money and more about future success. When I asked for updates, her answers became vague. She would say things like, "Everything's fine," or "You'll see soon," without explaining what that meant. Once, she laughed and said I sounded like an accountant. I laughed too, even though my stomach tightened. I checked the accounts more often than I admitted. Everything still looked normal. That reassured me. Numbers do not lie, I told myself. If something were wrong, I would see it there. At the same time, I noticed changes in her tone. She seemed distracted when we spoke, as if her mind was somewhere else. She was still warm, still charming, but there was distance. Conversations ended quickly. Promises to meet were postponed. I asked myself whether I was imagining things. Stress can make anyone act differently. Opportunity can make people restless. I did not want to mistake ambition for danger. There was one evening I remember clearly. I called her, and it rang until it went to voicemail. That was not unusual anymore, but this time she did not call back at all. Not that night. Not the next day. When she finally did, her explanation was rushed and unclear. She changed the subject before I could ask more. I felt something crack inside me then, very slightly. Not enough to break, but enough to leave a mark. Still, I did nothing. I told myself that trust means patience. That family deserves understanding, not suspicion. I believed that if I stayed calm, everything would sort itself out. Looking back now, I can see how carefully I protected the idea of trust, even when it no longer protected me. I ignored the signs because accepting them would mean facing a truth I was not ready for. At that time, though, I still believed this story would end simply. That she would come back, explain everything, and thank me for being there when she needed me most. I believed that trust, once given, would be honored. I did not yet understand that trust, when placed in the wrong hands, does not just disappear. It turns into something heavier. Something that stays with you long after the money, and even the person, is gone. The day I found out did not feel important at first. It was an ordinary morning, the kind where nothing seems like it could change your life. I had planned to review my accounts, the same way I did every few weeks. Not because I expected trouble, but because routine had always kept me safe. I made coffee, sat down, and logged in, already thinking about what I needed to do afterward. At first, I thought the system was slow. The numbers on the screen did not look right. I refreshed the page once, then again. I checked that I was looking at the correct account. Everything seemed normal, except the balance. It was far lower than it should have been. My first thought was that I had made a mistake. Maybe I was looking at the wrong date range. Maybe something had not loaded correctly. I checked past statements, scanning line by line. That was when I saw the transfers. There were several of them. Not one large withdrawal, but many, spread out over time. Each one authorized. Each one completed. I felt my chest tighten. My fingers hovered over the mouse as I clicked into the details. The destination accounts were unfamiliar, but the authorization name was not. It was hers. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were showing me. This could not be real. There had to be an explanation. A temporary move. A technical error. Something I had not been told yet. I checked the total amount moved. When the final number appeared, my breath caught. 310,000. Gone. I stood up so quickly that the chair scraped loudly against the floor. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls had moved closer. I paced, running my hands through my hair, trying to slow my thoughts. I told myself to stay calm. Panic would not help. There was probably a simple reason. I picked up my phone and called her. It rang. And rang. No answer. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. I left a short message, keeping my voice steady. I told her I needed to talk. That it was important. I did not accuse her. Not yet. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. I checked my phone again and called once more. This time, the call did not even ring. A recorded message informed me that the number was no longer in service. I felt cold all over. I sat back down and called the bank. The wait felt endless. When someone finally answered, I explained that there must be an error. That money had disappeared from my account. The person on the line was calm and professional. They asked questions. They confirmed my identity. Then they began to explain. The transfers were valid, they said. Authorized through proper access. There was no sign of fraud on their end. I asked how that was possible. They reminded me gently that I had given shared access. That the transfers were approved using credentials tied to her. I felt my face burn. Every word felt heavier than the last. I asked if the money could be reversed. They said no. I asked if there was anything they could do. They said they were sorry. When the call ended, I sat there in silence. The house was too quiet. Even the sound of the clock on the wall felt loud. I tried calling her again, even though I already knew it would not work. I sent messages, emails, anything that might reach her. Nothing. Hours passed. Then a full day. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every conversation we had ever had. Every moment I had ignored. Every pause, every vague answer, every joke that should have been a warning. In the morning, I checked again, hoping somehow the numbers would change. They did not. That was when the truth finally settled in. This was not an accident. This was not confusion or poor planning. This was a choice. The realization hurt more than the loss itself. Money can be earned again, slowly, painfully, but again. Trust, once broken like this, does not come back the same. I felt foolish. Not just sad or angry, but ashamed. I had prided myself on being careful, on seeing risks before they grew teeth. And yet I had walked straight into this. I did not tell anyone right away. I could not. Saying it out loud would make it real. I kept it inside, carrying it like a weight in my chest. Shock came first. A numbness that made everything feel distant. I went through my days on autopilot, answering emails, completing tasks, smiling when needed. Inside, everything felt frozen. Then denial tried to take over. I told myself she would call. That there was a reason. That maybe she planned to return it after something worked out. I clung to that idea longer than I should have. Anger followed close behind. It came in waves, sharp and sudden. Anger at her for taking what was not hers. Anger at myself for allowing it. Anger at the years of discipline that had been wiped away by one decision. Sometimes the anger had nowhere to go, so it turned inward. I replayed my own mistakes, judging myself more harshly than anyone else ever could. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I would recover. Wondering how I would explain this to anyone without sounding weak or careless. Wondering how someone who shared my childhood could do this to me. Shame settled in quietly. It whispered that I should have known better. That I deserved this for being naive. That people would look at me differently if they knew. I stopped checking my phone as often. Every notification made my heart jump, hoping it might be her, even though I knew it wouldn't be. Days turned into weeks. Still no word. No explanation. No apology. The silence was louder than any confession could have been. I began to understand that I was not just grieving money. I was grieving the sister I thought I knew. The relationship I believed was built on loyalty. The house felt emptier, even though nothing physical had changed. Trust had left, and it took warmth with it. I told myself I would deal with the practical steps later. Reports. Legal advice. Decisions. For now, I was just trying to breathe. By the end of that first month, one thing was clear. She was gone. And so was the life I had carefully built around the belief that family would never hurt me like this. After the shock settled into something I could carry without shaking, I knew I could not just sit still. Doing nothing felt like accepting what had happened, and I was not ready for that. I told myself there had to be a path forward, some way to undo the damage or at least hold her accountable. I started by reporting what had happened. Saying the words out loud was harder than I expected. Each explanation made the story sound less real, like something pulled from a bad movie. I explained how the money had been saved over years, how I had agreed to hold it for her, how it disappeared. I kept my voice calm, even when my chest felt tight. The responses were polite but distant. Questions were asked. Dates were noted. Screens were checked. And then the same problem kept coming up again and again. There was no formal contract. No written agreement. No document that clearly said the money was not hers to move. Everything had been built on trust. That word followed me through every conversation, hanging in the air like a quiet accusation. I had trusted her. The system had trusted the access I gave her. And now, there was nothing solid to hold on to. I spoke with professionals who specialized in these kinds of cases. Each meeting began with hope and ended with careful language. They explained the limits. Because the transfers were authorized, because time had passed, because there was no clear paper trail defining misuse, recovery would be difficult. In some cases, nearly impossible. I kept hearing phrases like gray area, and civil matter, and low probability of success. I nodded, took notes, and thanked people for their time. Inside, something was sinking. I still tried. I followed every suggestion. Filed reports. Submitted documents. Answered questions that made me feel exposed. Each step cost time and money, both of which were already in short supply. Weeks turned into months, and nothing moved forward. At the same time, I tried to find her. At first, I assumed she had simply gone quiet, avoiding me but still living her life somewhere. I checked the last address I had for her. Someone else lived there now. I reached out to old employers. They had no records beyond a certain point. I contacted people we both knew, asking carefully, not accusing, just asking if anyone had heard from her. No one had. Her online presence vanished too. Accounts that once showed constant activity went silent. Messages bounced back. Profiles were gone or abandoned. It was as if she had stepped off the map. I remember sitting in my car one afternoon after another dead end, gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand how a person could disappear so completely. We had shared the same past, the same roots, and now she felt unreal, like someone I had dreamed up. As my search failed, the story began to spread within the family. That brought a different kind of pain. Some people were sympathetic. They listened quietly, shook their heads, and said how terrible it was. They told me I did not deserve this. Those conversations were rare, but they helped me breathe a little easier. Others reacted differently. A few suggested that I should let it go, that holding on to anger would only hurt me. They said she was family, and family makes mistakes. They reminded me of how close we used to be. Their words felt heavy. Forgiveness sounded simple when it did not cost them anything. Then there were those who blamed me. They did not say it outright at first, but it was there in their tone, in the way they asked questions. Why did you give her access? Why didn't you get something in writing? You should have known how she was. Each question felt like another small cut. I started to notice how conversations changed when I entered a room. Some people avoided the topic entirely. Others offered advice I had not asked for. A few treated me like a cautionary tale. The hardest part was realizing that the betrayal had not just taken my money. It had shifted how people saw me. I began to pull away. Not because I wanted to be alone, but because being around others made me feel exposed. I did not want to defend myself anymore. I did not want to explain how trust works, or why I believed family meant safety. Financially, the damage was real and immediate. Plans I had made quietly for years were gone. The cushion I had built for emergencies no longer existed. I had to make choices I never thought I would face. Expenses were cut. Goals were delayed. Every decision carried more weight than before. I felt like I was constantly calculating, constantly bracing for the next problem. Emotionally, I was different too. I stopped sharing details about my life. I became careful with my words. I noticed how easily suspicion crept in where trust used to live. Even simple requests from others made me pause. Sleep became unreliable. Some nights, my mind replayed everything from the beginning, searching for a moment I could have changed. Other nights, I dreamed that she called, that there was an explanation that made sense, that I woke up relieved. Then morning would come. And nothing had changed. There were moments when anger surged again, sharp and loud. I would imagine confronting her, asking how she could do this, demanding answers. Those thoughts never led anywhere useful, but they were hard to stop. More often, there was just exhaustion. I was tired of fighting systems that did not protect me. Tired of conversations that ended in shrugs. Tired of carrying something so heavy without anywhere to set it down. Eventually, I had to accept a truth I had been avoiding. She was not coming back. Not with explanations. Not with apologies. And not with the money. Accepting that did not bring peace, but it did bring clarity. I stopped chasing updates that led nowhere. I stopped hoping for calls that would never come. I focused on what was directly in front of me. That meant rebuilding. Slowly. Quietly. Alone. I rebuilt my routines first. Structure gave me something solid to lean on. I tracked expenses carefully. I set smaller goals that felt reachable. Each small win mattered more than it ever had before. I also began rebuilding myself in ways I did not expect. I learned how to sit with uncomfortable feelings without trying to fix them immediately. I learned that grief does not follow a schedule. I learned that trust, once broken this deeply, takes time to even think about offering again. There were days when the weight felt manageable, and days when it felt unbearable. I stopped judging myself for either. Family gatherings became rare. When I did attend, I kept things light. I did not want to reopen wounds or invite opinions. Protecting my peace became more important than being understood. People eventually stopped asking about her. That silence was strange too. It felt like the world had moved on, even though I was still carrying the consequences. Her absence became a quiet fact, something no one addressed directly. I carried both the financial loss and the emotional scar forward with me. They shaped how I planned, how I trusted, how I saw the future. I did not come out of this stronger in a dramatic way. There was no sudden transformation. What I gained was harder and quieter. I learned that sometimes there is no justice that feels fair. Sometimes there is only acceptance and the decision to keep going. And so I did. I rebuilt my life step by step, knowing it would never look exactly the same again, but determined that this betrayal would not be the final chapter of my story. Time did not rush forward after everything fell apart. It moved slowly, one day at a time, forcing me to live inside the aftermath. I learned quickly that rebuilding was not a single decision. It was 1,000 small ones, repeated every day, even when I was tired of choosing. At first, survival was the goal. Paying bills. Keeping a roof over my head. Making sure one problem did not turn into 5 more. I focused on what I could control. I worked longer hours. I said no to things I once said yes to. I became careful again, maybe more careful than before. Money slowly returned to my life, but not easily. Every dollar felt heavier than it used to. I tracked everything. I planned further ahead. I stopped imagining big futures and started building smaller, safer ones. Years passed. From the outside, things looked fine. I had stability again. I had routines that worked. People around me assumed I had moved on. In many ways, they were right. But moving on is not the same as healing. The betrayal stayed with me in quiet ways. I noticed it when someone asked for help, and my first instinct was hesitation. I noticed it when trust felt like a risk instead of a comfort. I noticed it when memories surfaced without warning, usually late at night, when everything was quiet. I learned how to live with those moments instead of fighting them. I did not talk about them often. Explaining the story always reopened something I preferred to keep closed. As time went on, the world changed. Technology advanced. People came and went. Entire chapters of life opened and closed. Through it all, there was one subject that slowly faded into silence. My sister. At first, her name still came up. Someone would ask if I had heard from her. Someone else would wonder aloud where she might be. Those questions always landed the same way, heavy and unresolved. Eventually, people stopped asking. Not because answers were found, but because time taught them there would never be any. I stopped wondering too. That did not happen suddenly. It happened in stages. First, I stopped checking old contacts. Then I stopped replaying imagined conversations. Then one day, I realized I had gone months without thinking about her at all. That realization surprised me. The anger softened over time. It did not disappear, but it lost its sharp edge. What replaced it was something quieter. Distance. Acceptance. Forgiveness never arrived. I thought about it many times. People talked about forgiveness as if it were a door you could open once you were ready. But every time I approached that door, I understood something clearly. Forgiveness requires acknowledgement. It requires responsibility. It requires truth. None of those things ever came. Without them, forgiveness felt empty, like pretending a wound never existed. I chose not to pretend. So I closed that chapter instead. Not with anger. Not with speeches or dramatic decisions. Just with silence. Years became decades. I built a life that fit me. Not flashy. Not perfect. But solid. I learned what I needed and what I did not. I surrounded myself with fewer people, but stronger boundaries. I valued peace more than approval. Trust returned in limited ways. Carefully. Slowly. I learned how to give it without handing over my safety. I learned that it was possible to be open without being exposed. Still, there were parts of me that never went back to how they were. I became more private. More guarded. Some people mistook that for coldness. I did not correct them. The truth was simpler. I had learned what it cost to be careless with trust. On anniversaries of certain dates, I sometimes paused without knowing why. The body remembers things the mind tries to forget. I would feel a brief heaviness, then let it pass. I did not tell new people in my life about what happened. Not because I was ashamed, but because it no longer defined me. It was a chapter, not the whole book. As the years stacked up, the idea of her became distant. She stopped feeling like a person and started feeling like a story from another lifetime. Someone I once knew long ago. Family gatherings changed. Older faces disappeared. Younger ones arrived. History reshaped itself around new events, new memories. Her absence became permanent. No explanations arrived. No apologies. No unexpected calls. And with each passing year, it became easier to believe that nothing ever would. There was a strange comfort in that belief. If the chapter was truly over, then I could stop waiting for it to reopen. I told myself that some endings do not need closure. Some doors close quietly, and that silence is the ending. I believed that chapter of my life was finished. I believed it with enough certainty that I stopped looking backward. I focused on the life in front of me, convinced that whatever came next would have nothing to do with the past I had buried. For 30 years, that belief held. I had no reason to think otherwise. I did not know that silence, when stretched long enough, can still be broken. And that even the most carefully closed chapters can sometimes reopen when you least expect them to. The day it happened was ordinary in every possible way. I was moving through my routine without thinking much about it. The kind of day built from habits I had practiced for years. The house was quiet. I had plans for the afternoon, small ones, the kind that make life feel steady. Nothing about the day suggested it would become something I would remember forever. Then there was a knock at the door. It was firm, but not confident. Not rushed either. Just a knock, followed by silence. I remember feeling slightly annoyed. I was not expecting anyone. I considered ignoring it, but something made me stand up anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was habit. When I opened the door, I did not recognize the person standing there. He was young, but not in the way youth usually shows itself. His face looked tired, worn down by things someone his age should not have carried yet. He was thin, his clothes loose and clearly worn too many times without being replaced. His eyes moved quickly, unsure where to settle. He looked uncomfortable just standing there, like he expected to be turned away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat and asked my name. When I nodded, his shoulders dropped slightly, as if confirming something he had rehearsed in his head. He told me his name. It meant nothing to me at first. Then he said one more thing. He said he was my sister's son. The words did not land right away. They hovered in the air between us, heavy and unreal. I stared at him, searching his face for something familiar. A shape of the eyes. A line in the mouth. Anything. I saw nothing. My first thought was that this was a mistake. Or worse, a lie. After everything that had happened, distrust came easily. I asked him to repeat himself. His voice shook as he did. He explained slowly, carefully, like someone walking across thin ice. He said he had been looking for me for a long time. That it took years to find the right address. That he was not sure I would even open the door. I noticed then how exhausted he looked. Not just physically, but in a deeper way. Like someone who had been surviving one day at a time for too long. I asked where his mother was. He looked down. He said he did not know for sure. He said she had been gone for a while. Maybe years. He used words like missing and probably gone, but never said them with certainty. There was no clear answer, only fragments. He told me he had been on his own. That things had fallen apart slowly. One place after another. One promise after another. Until there was nothing left. He said he had nowhere else to go. As he spoke, my chest tightened. Every sentence pulled at something I had buried decades ago. Her absence. Her silence. The questions that never found answers. Anger rose fast, sharp and familiar. Not at him, but through him. Anger that had never fully left, only gone quiet. Anger that now had a face standing in front of me. I wanted to shut the door. I wanted to tell him this was not my responsibility, that I had already paid enough for her choices, that I had rebuilt my life piece by piece and would not let the past tear it open again. At the same time, disbelief held me still. This was impossible. For 30 years, I had believed that chapter was closed, that whatever became of her would never touch my life again. And now here he was, her son, standing on my doorstep. I felt pulled in opposite directions. One part of me saw a stranger. Another saw a child caught in the shadow of the same person who had once destroyed my trust. I noticed his hands shaking slightly. I noticed how carefully he avoided looking directly at me, as if expecting rejection. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for explanations. He only asked if he could come in and talk. My mind raced. Memories collided with the present. Her voice. The missing money. The silence that followed. Years of work to build distance from it all. Grief surfaced too. Not fresh, but deep. Grief for the sister I lost. Grief for the life that might have been different. Grief for the fact that even now, she was finding ways to disrupt my peace. I stood there longer than was polite, longer than was comfortable. Finally, I stepped aside. Not because I was ready. Not because I had forgiven anything. But because turning him away felt like repeating a cycle I hated. He stepped inside quietly, like someone afraid of making noise. He looked around as if trying to understand the space, the life I had built. As the door closed behind him, I felt something shift. The past was no longer distant. It was sitting in my living room. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach drop, that whatever came next would force me to face feelings I had avoided for 30 years. The silence I had lived with for so long had finally been broken. And I had no idea what that would cost me. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment after he came in. The house felt different with someone else inside it, like the walls were listening. I offered him water. He accepted with a quiet nod, holding the glass carefully, as if it might disappear if he wasn't gentle with it. I told him he could sit. He stayed near the edge of the chair, not fully relaxing, not fully tense either. Just waiting. I asked him how he found me. He explained slowly, choosing his words with care. He said it took years. Old records. Bits of information from people who barely remembered my name. Dead ends and wrong turns. More than once, he had almost given up. I asked why he kept looking. He looked down at his hands before answering. He said he did not have anyone else. That was the first crack. Once he started talking, the story came out in pieces. Not dramatic. Not rehearsed. Just facts, delivered the way people do when they have told the same story too many times. He said his childhood never settled into one place. There were apartments he barely remembered, schools he attended for a few months at a time, faces that came and went without explanation. Promises were made often, kept rarely. Sometimes his mother would disappear for days. Sometimes longer. When she returned, things would feel hopeful for a while. Then the cycle would repeat. He learned early not to ask questions. When things finally collapsed, there was no clear moment, no single event. One day, she was just gone. No note. No goodbye. No explanation that made sense. After that came systems instead of family. He spoke about foster homes without bitterness, but without warmth either. Some places were better than others. Some were worse. None felt permanent. He learned to pack quickly. To leave without attachments. To keep expectations low. Money was always tight. Sometimes there was enough. Sometimes there wasn't. He worked when he could. He slept where he was allowed. I waited for him to mention the money. Eventually, he did. He said he only learned about it much later. Not from her, but from fragments overheard, from arguments that stopped when he entered a room. Even then, it never meant anything real to him. It was not something he saw. Not something that changed his life. He looked up at me then, finally meeting my eyes. He told me he never benefited from it. He said he barely knew her as a person, and what he did know was confusing and distant. She was someone who drifted in and out of his life, never fully present. Listening to him felt like holding two truths at the same time. I could hear her in certain phrases, see her mannerisms in small movements, the way he shrugged when things felt out of his control, the way he tried to soften hard facts with quiet explanations. It unsettled me. At the same time, there was no malice in him, no manipulation, no sense of entitlement. He did not speak like someone asking for something. He spoke like someone explaining how he arrived at a place he never planned to be. That made it harder. Anger stirred again, but it had nowhere to land. He was not the one who betrayed me. He was not the one who disappeared with everything I had built. Yet he carried her face, her history, the consequences of her choices. I felt a familiar conflict tightening in my chest. Part of me wanted distance, safety, a clear line drawn between past and present. I had spent decades protecting that boundary. Another part of me saw something painfully familiar. A person left behind by someone who should have protected them. I asked him what he wanted. He hesitated, then answered honestly. He said he did not know. He said he just needed time. A place to breathe. Someone who could tell him the truth about where he came from. He did not ask me to fix his life. That mattered. Still, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. Every instinct I had built over 30 years warned me to be careful, to not repeat old mistakes, to not confuse sympathy with responsibility. I thought about everything I had lost, the years it took to recover, the peace I had fought hard to maintain. I also thought about the person sitting across from me, how none of this had been his choice. The room felt smaller as the decision formed. This was not about money anymore. It was about whether I would let the past decide the future, whether I would punish her by turning away from him, or whether I would protect the present by choosing something different. I did not have an answer yet. I only knew that whatever choice I made would shape both our lives in ways I could not undo. The consequences of her actions had reached across generations, and now they rested in my hands. I did not make the decision all at once. There was no speech, no moment where everything suddenly felt clear. I simply told him he could stay for a short while. Not forever. Just long enough to get his footing. I said there would be rules. We talked about boundaries first. Simple ones. Respect for the space. Honest communication. A clear understanding that this was temporary. I needed those lines drawn as much as he did. He listened closely. He did not argue. He nodded and thanked me in a way that felt careful, almost restrained. Like someone afraid gratitude might turn into obligation. The first few days were quiet. He moved through the house lightly, always aware of where he was. He cleaned up after himself without being asked. He spent long hours outside, looking for work, returning tired but determined. We spoke mostly in the evenings. Short conversations at first. Neutral topics. Weather. Schedules. Practical things. Trust did not appear quickly. It arrived in small moments. One night, we shared a meal without talking much. Another night, he mentioned a job interview and asked if I thought his answer made sense. Another time, he laughed at something on the television, surprised by the sound of his own voice. I noticed how hard he worked just to seem normal. As days turned into weeks, the distance softened. Stories began to surface naturally, not as confessions but as memories that slipped out when defenses were down. He spoke about places he had lived, people who helped briefly, and people who disappeared just as quickly. Sometimes, without meaning to, he spoke about her. Not with anger. Not with love. Just with confusion. He described her as someone who was always searching for something she could never quite reach. Someone who believed the next change would fix everything. I listened without interrupting, even when my chest tightened. He told me she struggled more than she ever admitted. That things fell apart faster than anyone realized. That by the end, regret followed her like a shadow. She spoke about me once, he said. That caught my attention. He said she mentioned losing someone she should not have lost. Someone she never made things right with. She never explained more than that. Hearing this did not bring relief. It brought sadness. Not enough to forgive, but enough to understand. Helping him began to change the shape of my grief. It no longer sat only in the past. It lived in the present, asking something of me. I realized I was not helping him for her. I was helping him for myself. Every small step he took forward felt like reclaiming something I had lost. Not the money. Not the years. My sense of choice. I showed him how to manage what little he earned. How to plan instead of react. How to build something slowly, even when the past keeps pulling at you. He listened the way I once listened to people I trusted. That realization stayed with me. There were difficult moments too. Times when frustration flared. When fear whispered that this would end the same way. Each time, I reminded myself that this was not repetition. This was response. Boundaries stayed firm. I did not rescue him from consequences. I did not promise what I could not give. I supported effort, not excuses. Over time, the house felt less tense. Laughter returned in small doses. So did honesty. I learned truths about her that hurt to hear. How pride kept her from asking for help. How shame kept her from returning. How regret grew heavier the longer she stayed away. These truths did not erase what she did. They simply placed it in context. I realized then that compassion did not mean approval. It did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing not to let revenge shape my future. I was not forgiving her. I was refusing to become hardened by her choices. Helping him became a form of reckoning. A way to face the damage honestly without passing it forward. The past remained painful. But it no longer had control. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was choosing how this story continued. And that choice mattered more than any apology I never received. Change did not arrive all at once. It came the way most real change does, quietly and without announcements. He found work that was not glamorous but steady. Long hours, modest pay, honest effort. He came home tired, sometimes frustrated, but different from before. Grounded. Focused. Structure changed him. So did being seen. We settled into a rhythm that felt natural. Mornings were early. Evenings were simple. Meals shared without ceremony. Conversations that drifted between practical matters and small reflections about the day. He began to talk about the future without flinching. That was new. He opened a small account of his own. Learned how to plan beyond the end of the week. Learned that progress does not have to be dramatic to be real. Watching this did something unexpected to me. It softened a weight I had carried for years. I realized that while I had rebuilt my life once already, I had done it with clenched teeth. This time felt different. This time, there was purpose beyond survival. I stopped waiting for the past to correct itself. The truth was simple and final. The money was never coming back. No call would explain it. No discovery would make it right. Accepting that no longer felt like defeat. It felt like honesty. Justice, as I once imagined it, was not available to me. There would be no reckoning that balanced the scales. No punishment that matched the damage. But there was something else. There was the chance to stop the damage from spreading. Helping him did not erase what she did. It did not settle old accounts or restore lost years. What it did was interrupt a pattern. He did not inherit the money. He did not inherit the betrayal. He inherited a choice. And so did I. As time passed, the house felt less like a shelter and more like a home again. Not the same as before, but real in its own way. Eventually, We talked about next steps. Independence. Moving forward. Not separation but growth. I encouraged him to build something of his own. To stand without leaning too heavily on anyone, including me. When the day came that he moved out, it was not an ending. It was a milestone. We stood in the doorway where this story had restarted, and this time, there was no tension. No fear. Just understanding. After he left, the house was quiet again. But it was not empty. I reflected often on how easily betrayal travels. How one choice can ripple outward, touching lives that never asked to be involved. I also reflected on how compassion travels the same way. It moves forward. It changes direction. It refuses to stop where harm began. I never received justice. But I found something that mattered more. I broke the cycle. The betrayal ended with me. And the compassion did not. That was the closure I never expected. And in the end, it was enough.